state your name, today's date, your birth date, and how long you've lived in Hernando County?
Yes, ma'am. My name is James Frederick Blackburn, Jr. I was born 2/21/45 in Brooksville. I was delivered by Dr. Harvard, an old doctor around here for years and years, who probably delivered most babies within 50 miles of here. I grew up on a farm in Spring Lake, but we weren't able to move out to Spring Lake because there was no electricity. So I lived in Brooksville until about 1950-51. I lived right down here by what is the old jail, which is the records department now. In 1951, we were able to get electricity, and we built us what was referred to then as a Jim Walter home or a shell home. Basically, it was just some walls and a roof, and probably, certainly by today's standards, was a shack. Okay, we had cold water coming into the house, and we had a tub that we bathed in, and my sister got the first water and I got the slime. Okay, and then we would just throw the water out in the backyard. We had outhouses. We had an old outhouse. Our first outhouse was a chair with a hole in the bottom, a wooden chair with a hole in the bottom of it, and it was under the eave of an old barn that was on the farm. And then the old barn fell down on the outhouse, and so we really made us a better outhouse. We got us some 2x4s, and we got us some tar paper and stuff like that, and we built us a really nice outhouse. I remember about living in Brooksville is, as I recall, they were called derby races, and little boys would build cars, and they would start out at the bank here and go down the hill toward the jail, and some of them would run off the road and stuff like that, and they would have collisions and stuff like that. Well, Hernando County, as I recall at that time, back in the late 40s and 50s, was about 7,000 people, and we had one sheriff, we had one deputy, Red Brass, who everybody knew who he was, and we had a guy that ran the jail. If they needed more people, they would deputize them in like a posse. It was not uncommon if there was somebody that was doing something that people didn't like. They probably never went to the sheriff. I'm sure the sheriff probably knew about these things, but nothing, he didn't intervene. But what would happen is you would have a group of men, fathers, that would get together, and they would, let's say if it was a child predator. Back then we didn't have child predators, okay? Or not that I remember, but it was somebody that was doing some stealing or something that was the community didn't accept. You would have a group of fathers that would get together, and they would pay this person a visit, okay? And by nighttime, that person would probably be out of the county, or they would change their behavior. I've done a genealogical study of my family, but I'll give you the shortened version. They came from South Georgia, down through Lake City, down through Gainesville, Star, into southern Marion County, and they came to Spring Lake around the mid to late 1870s. So, my family's been around here a long time.
What brought them down?
When I started my study of my family, I've often wondered why they came to Spring Lake, and I think because other people had come down that they knew, and these were relatives, some kind of a relative. And let me say about Spring Lake, about relationship, many people were kin to each other. They had intermarried over the years. And the old joke around Spring Lake was, you better be careful what you say to somebody, because they might go tell on you. Spring Lake was was rural, was very agrarian, open fields and pastures. Most everybody worked, except the people that lived here in Brooksville. Most everybody did orange grove work, or they worked in the mines. The two biggest forms of employment was agricultural related and the mining industry. The mining industry started in about the early 1900s, and it gave, for many, many years, many families around here were raised from working in the mine, their parents working in the mine. I went to the Spring Lake School. My dad went to the Spring Lake School. When it was a two-story red brick building, and it was until I was like the third or fourth grade, which would be like 1952, 53, somewhere around there. They tore the top half off because they determined the ground wasn't stable enough to have two stories. So when I started out there, it was two stories, but then they tore off the one story. In Spring Lake, as you go through Spring Lake, you'll see a little a building called the Community Center. Many people know as the Old Rock Building. And that was built in the 30s by the CCC camp. Do you know what the CCC?
I do not.
Civilian Conservation Corps. My dad and my uncle Cecil were in the CCC camp, and what it was is they did public works project. They built a lot of state parks that still exist today, and they got to keep $5 of their money, and the rest of their money went home to the families to support the families. So basically, it was a works project to help people during the Depression. Going back to the Old Rock building at the Spring Lake School, this was our lunch room, and over the years, various people cooked there, but the one that I had and was most notable to me was a lady, Josephine Harville, who was whom they had married into an old family out there, the Harville family. And she was a great cook, and she cooked everything on an old gas stove in great big pots.
But what year was that?
In probably, well, I said 51 through, so I guess it was 57, 58 that I know of. She was there, and then Alice Morgan, another elderly lady out there, she cooked out there, but I remember most of Miss Josephine. And my favorite meals were, and by the way, I think they were like a quarter. A meal was a quarter.
Lunch. For lunch.
Mm-hmm. And you could eat all you wanted to until it was all gone. And she made apple cobbler and chocolate pudding and stuff like that. It was a stage. This was like our auditorium for the school, and we had plays. We did back then. We did a lot of square dancing, which was very popular, and then once you got into this, my dad, when he went there, he was grades 1 through 8, and then he went into town. When I was there, it was grades 1 through 6. You had a teacher for the first and second, teacher for the third and fourth, teacher for the fifth and sixth, who was also the school principal. And we would have at the end of the sixth grade, if you passed, you would go into junior high school here on, okay, and you had a little graduation ceremony, for the graduates. And I am very proud to say that the best years of my life and the best schools that I have ever been to is at the Spring Lake School. Everybody was very patriotic. This was after World War II. And every morning before school started, we got in a semicircle around the flag facing east, and we would sing like God Bless America. We would say the Pledge of Allegiance. We would have Bible verses, which some of this stuff you wouldn't do today, and which is to me a shame. And but we would say the Lord's Prayer and whatever, and then we would go to our classes. One of the things that they did, the teacher would do a physical view of all the students. She would look in their ears, looking, to assess their general cleanliness.
Sure.
This days you wouldn't do stuff like that.
How often was that done?
That was done every day, and up on the up on the board they had all the kids listed, and if you were clean for that day, you'd get a gold star or silver star or something like that. Gold would be,
Really clean.
yeah, it would be really clean, yeah. And and these days that would be violating somebody's rights or something, but there was good reason for them to do it. We had, back when I was going, there was stuff called Florida sores. It was caused by, it was like infections that kid got from playing in the dirt and stuff. And they just they would just look in your ears. Just like I can look at you, you
Yeah.
look clean. You know what I
Gold
mean?
star for me today. All
Yeah.
right.
And if you did not, well, if you were not clean, I'm sure that the parents were notified somehow or whatever,
Right.
As you start down toward the lake on the right, there's a big two-story house, the Ayers place. And across there, from there is the old Harville homestead, which is the oldest home in Spring Lake. And Carolyn just told me yesterday, Carolyn McCoy told me that she found some records that indicated the home was built in 1847.
Wow.
So Grandma Harville lived over here and Grandma Ayers lived over here. And Grandma Ayers had a tangerine tree that the kids would went out over the right of way, on the road right of way, and the kids would go over there and get tangerines, okay? Well, I got some tangerines and I splattered Grandma Harville's mailbox. And so for my punishment for a week is I could not, we had recess where we'd just go out and it was free play, okay? Well, I had to stand in the corner during recess for a week. Plus, that Friday night, we were going to have a square dance, and I was not allowed to be in the square dance. But that's not what concerned me. What concerned me is that the teacher told me that what I did was a federal offense, and that if the federal marshals heard about this, that they would come and take me away and lock me up. Well, I'm just a little kid, 6, 7, 8 years old, and the only thing, we didn't have a TV until I was 69, but when I lived in town, we'd go to the matinees to the old theater. And so to me, the marshal was some mysterious guy that came and got the bad guys, So for about a year, I was terrified that the marshal was going to come and pick me up and haul me away,
Are you still afraid to check your mail?
No.
Okay. You got over it. Okay.
No. People's lives, a lot of the people that I knew, their lives were centered around work. Everybody worked, and they worked long, hard hours, and they didn't make a whole lot, okay? And I think a lot of us, and a lot of times, my dad was a heavy equipment operator, and there wasn't any work going on. He would have to build a fence for somebody or dish their grove or something like that. And a lot of us didn't have very much financial stuff, money, We all had a garden, we had chickens and pigs and cows and whatever, and we would, that's how we sustained ourselves. Most everybody had a garden. It was not uncommon that for what we were eating that night for supper, had a few hours earlier, had been running around in our yard, okay? And we would say, oh, was this little Charlie or something? I liked him. I don't want to eat him.
Do you prefer meals from that day and age to what we have now?
Sure. The other thing that was very important to a lot of people was the church. When I was very small, it was an old frame building, and people sang. Nobody in Spring Lake had a wonderful voice. Okay, we were very unpolished people. We were uncouth, whatever. And but people sang from their heart, and when the lady that played the piano was like a juke joint piano. I mean, she would get to playing on the piano, and everybody get to singing. And I didn't mean really to put in those words, but the whole building would just shake. It's vacant now, but it's called Lee's Store. George Lee, his father ran it, and he sold cow feed, hog feed, uh, wire, barbed wire, chicken wire, whatever, and plus you could buy uh, clothes there, old dungarees and stuff, and they had a meat department in the back, and they sold canned goods and stuff like that. And it was some of the best meat you'd ever eat in your life. It was always so tender and everything. But a lot of the, if it hadn't have been for Mr. Lee, who was from there was a lot of the people got their staples from there, their canned goods and their sugar and lard and stuff like that. And Mr. Lee, that there were no credit cards back then. Okay, Mr. Lee, you get he'd run a credit account, and a lot of times families would go in there and they would get say $30 worth of items, give $15, and then they go back in there again, because and I don't doubt in my mind that when Mr. Lee passed away, that people owed him a lot of money. But I'm going to tell you something. There would be a lot of people in Spring Lake that would have not had anything to eat, particularly the staples, if it hadn't been for Mr. Lee, And he was liked. He was well liked and well respected in the community. Very common to call people aunt, uncle, grandma, and grandpa, and technically they weren't. Uncle Roy Mountain was my maternal grandmother's cousin, but I called him Uncle Roy, and Aunt Thelma. Grandma Harville, distant relative, I called her Grandma Harville, and it was, women were often referred to by Miss, not by Mrs., but we'd say like Miss Doris or Miss so and so, Miss Charlotte Lee. We called her Miss Charlotte and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And while I'm on this, Miss Charlotte's mother was Ruth Warnicki. Her and her father was two of the finest people ever. But she was my Sunday school teacher, and we had this thing called MYF, Methodist Youth Fellowship, and we would go to Crystal River and whatever, because it was a chance to get out
of Spring Lake, yeah.
for a while. And but she carted my rear end all over the place, and
this is Charlotte Lee.
Charlotte Lee's mother.
Charlotte Lee's
Yeah, we had discipline, and we had respect for people. We particularly for older people. We were taught to, and we were taught to say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, or miss, or something like that. Even to black people.
Mhm.
I'm telling you the way I was taught. I'm not saying all the kids were like this, but the vast majority of the kids were taught to respect. And if I said yeah or no or something like that to a person, my parents, particularly my dad, would say, "What did you just say?" And I'd say, "Oh, yes, sir," because we were taught to respect other people, particularly other people's property. You do not go on other people's property without their knowledge and consent. And most of the time they didn't care. They said, "Oh, I don't care. I can go hunting." Said, "I don't care. Just don't shoot my cow or tear up my fence or something."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you feel like those types of ideals are different now?
Oh, sure. I see in a lot of our young people, not all of them, but a lot of them, I see a lot of disrespect for other people's property and other people's things and whatever. And a lot of what we had, we earned it the hard way, and we had respect for it. Of course, we didn't have all the tech stuff that we had then. We didn't get a TV until it was 1959. And most of the time, there was only 2 or 3 channels, and it would be snow and stuff like that. And when we got it, we didn't know how to hook it up. To make a long story short, Doyle Lee, it was very simple to hook up, but Doyle Lee, my dad paid him $10 because we didn't have, and basically it was an antenna on a pole,
Yeah.
and you run the wire down, and then we would cut a hole up through the floor of the house and whatever. And we were trying to They told us to get the biggest antenna you can get because you get more stations. So we got this big old antenna on this pole, and there was Doyle Lee, and I was just a kid, and my dad, and we were trying. It was top heavy. They'd say, "No, you got to retire. You got to move over here, whatever." So finally, they tied a rope around the top of the antenna, which was on this long pole, and put me up on the roof. And I pulled it up, and while they steadied it, whatever. And we had an old pipe wrench that we would turn the pole, and that's how we got.
That's how
it.
you fine-tuned your signal?
Exactly. No, really.
Yeah,
That's what, in fact, what I always
believe
did.
you.
And that old pipe was there, and they'd say, "Okay, you got to go out there and turn the antenna," and I'd turn it a little bit. No, you went back. And they said, "You need to go back." No, no, no. And that went on for a while,
And this is the, early 60s, I guess?
I get about,
Yeah.
late 50s, early 60s. They didn't we have drugs and stuff like that. Not that I know of, okay? I never heard about it. One of the biggest things was drinking for the men, the big social. And there's a Lake Iola over in Pasco County. They had a club over there, and there was down here on 41 was the Moose Hall or something. Hernando County was dry. You know what that means?
Yeah, they did not sell
Liquor.
alcohol.
Yeah. So you had to go up to the Citrus County line or the Pasco County line to get something to drink. Plus,
But when was that? Do you remember?
in the 50s, 40s, and 50s.
Yeah.
And people made their own moonshine. And down there on the County Line Road, back down there, my dad always told me there was was a still down there. That's where they, where they made the moonshine. But drinking was frowned upon by most everybody, particularly on the outside. But it was an emotional release for a lot of people. Just get drunk and then,
Yeah.
feel a little better. There was not a lot of medications and dope and stuff back then.
Just mainly the men drank. Was it
Yeah.
the women didn't drink?
Well, probably, but it was really frowned upon for anybody to drink,
Sure.
but particularly a woman, because a woman was supposed to be a woman. I'm sure that a lot of people did things under the table, that would.
I don't care where you live or where you are.
Yeah,
You know.
We had a car and we had a telephone, but they were for business purposes. The back. On the telephone, they had, what are they called? A party line. Have you ever heard of a party line? Okay, there would be like 6 people on on the same line, and this one might be a short and a long or whatever. But what we would do, first of all, you didn't get on. The phone was for business in case of emergencies or something. But what we kids would do, we would pick up the receiver and we would listen to other people's conferences. We got quite adept at doing this. You'd pick it up a little bit like that, and there was a little black thing that shut the on,
Yeah.
and you'd put your finger on that, and you'd let this off, and then nobody would know. And sometimes, like if we wanted to use the phone and some people were talking and talking, we'd say, "This is, Fred. We need to make a call. Could you get off?" No, we did this. It was called Party Line.
Yeah.
The beauty of Spring Lake is its openness, and I'm talking particularly about then. In my opinion, Spring Lake has been ruined. Hernando County has been ruined. We've got people moved in here, and everybody knew everybody, and whatever. And now you don't know anybody. I mean, you know people, but it's Saturdays. Everybody come into town to Brooksville.
Oh, yeah.
And get their groceries, gossip, because that's how you got your news. And when we were living in town, people would gather on their porches in the evening and talk, and that's how people got their, the local scuttlebutt or whatever.
Sure.
And that people just knew everybody, because there was like 6,000-7,000 people in the whole county. We're like 170 now, and but it was sparsely populated, and a lot of times if you had to get somewhere, if you didn't have a car, you had to know somebody had a car or something.
Do you feel like Spring Lake has changed over time? Because I
Yeah,
know clearly the development of Spring Hill has been pretty prolific. I mean, it
yeah.
has exploded, but how do you feel about Spring Lake and all that?
I think it's still, Spring Lake is not a Spring Hill. It's still less people, but there were even less people when I was there. And yes, there's too many people living in
Too many
Spring Lake.
people living in Spring
Yeah,
Lake.
and I hope to God that as long as I'm living, that I don't look out my window and see a big development out in where there's pasture.
Do you feel like the history of the county is being well preserved and well presented to?
I was going to make some open remarks about this. I really think that what you're doing is really good, and I'll tell you why. Because the people that have lived here know the history of this county, however they see it, and history is how people view it. It, a lot of the people that have been around here and know the history of this county and events and things that happen and whatever, they're fast leaving us, and I'm headed there. We were simple people. We just simply lived, and I am glad to say that my relatives and some of my friends, that we were all a part of this. That's vanishing. It's going away. It's too bad.